Welcome to this week's episode of Everyday Thin Places. I'm Rachel Gallagher, and I'm an interfaith hospice chaplain.
And I'm Elizabeth Ferrasso, and I'm a birth doula.
And in each episode of Everyday Thin Places, we draw from our experiences supporting birthing people and dying people to explore with honesty, authenticity, and humor how we can all become more truly living people.
Well, welcome back, everyone. And I'm saying welcome back because we sort of decided after our episode last week, in the process of it, we realized that it was an episode that was part of a little series. And so we talked last week about fear. We realized that you can't talk about fear without acknowledging the idea of pain, physical pain, emotional pain. And we realized that so much of the way that we, in our jobs and in our own lives, deal with fear and deal with pain and help other people to do so is through the power of ritual. So this is the middle episode of this 3-part series. You might want to go back and listen to fear if you haven't yet. And today we're going to talk about pain. And it seems really important to acknowledge. Maybe this could go without saying. It's really important to acknowledge that 3 whole episodes is still just a sliver of attention for some really big topics, some highly personal topics, some things that we just can't touch on all the different kinds of fear. We can't touch on all the nuances of pain. Even with our professional experience and our personal experiences, we have listeners who have kinds of pain, intensity of pain, varieties of pain that we just have no experience with whatsoever. And so we are scratching the surface. We hope we're offering something valuable, but we just want people to have a little bit of grace with us. Understand that we're not gonna cover it sufficiently in this time, and we're gonna ask that the conversation just be open to where listeners who have an idea, have a perspective, have an experience that deserves some more time and attention, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah,
and we want to have this podcast have a very long life to it. We're hoping that years from now, we're still doing this. And so there's plenty of time for us to look at different layers, to examine different facets. And so if we're leaving something out, we're sorry. We don't want to cause offense. We don't want to belittle anyone's experience by not giving a proper acknowledgement, but we also want to invite people to help us and guide us and converse with us so that we can share more stories and we can hit those nuances. So, Rachel, when you hear the word pain and when you think about the life that you've lived, what stories, what ideas, what emotions come to mind as you think about your own life experience with pain?
It's strange because I feel like I deal a lot with other people's pain in my professional life. So, I work in healthcare, and a big part of healthcare is managing people's pain, especially in hospice. That's one of the main goals of hospice, is to make people comfortable and to manage their pain. But beyond my professional life, in my personal life, I guess, I think about the physical pain that I've experienced, and I don't think that I'm an expert on the matter, but I do think that I've experienced pain, perhaps in a unique way. I shared a little bit on a previous episode that I'm a cancer survivor, and the type of cancer that I had was extremely painful, and that's how I knew I even had cancer to begin with, was because of the pain that it was causing me. And as a 24-year-old who had been otherwise healthy, that pain was really alarming. And so I think I probably have a bit of a unique take on pain because of how it affected my life that was kind of like going along according to plan. And then pain is the thing that really upset all of it. And just to kind of piggyback on what you said earlier, my experience is probably different from most people's experiences. And, especially when I talk about the pain that I witness in my job, I am acutely aware that pain is different for everyone. So be it physical pain, which I think is the first thing that comes to mind, but also emotional pain and spiritual pain even. So pain has a lot of facets. And yeah, I expect that we'll probably come back to pain in a future episode because there is just so much to talk about. And there are so many stories that people can share. But yeah, for me personally, the big thing that comes to mind when you say pain is my experience with cancer when I was younger and the pain that I felt during that time.
Yeah. And I think a really important distinction that we want to make is that pain and suffering can happen at the same time, but they're not the same thing because we can have pain without suffering. I think an example of that is someone who goes for a really great run. They feel the sting in their lungs, they feel their muscles burning, and it just feels good. And so there's that sort of pain that's totally apart from suffering. We can have suffering totally in the absence of what we would consider to be physical pain.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they come together. I'm curious when you think back about your experience, having pain and not knowing that it was cancer, finding out that as a young person you had cancer, and then actually going through treatment, going through the emotional journey of battling cancer. When you think about the distinction between pain and suffering, what kind of wisdom do you gain from your own story of sort of thinking back on that experience?
Yeah, that's pain and suffering are like the two of the biggest words that I would use to describe that period of my life. So just to give a little even more background on what went on, I had been starting out on my opera career. I had just booked my first professional contract, and I was far away from home. And I was having severe pain in my back, which I feel like back pain isn't that uncommon.
Right.
Like, I feel like I know so many people that have gone through periods in their life where they had pain in their back for one reason or another. So pinched nerves, stress, some sort of an injury from lifting something and not lifting with your legs. There's a million reasons why people have pain in their back. And I feel like everybody I know has had some sort of pain in their back at some point in their life. So at 24 and having this pain in my back, I had no reason to believe that it was cancer. And neither did any doctors. So being so far from home, I went to a lot of different medical type professionals to try to figure out what was causing this pain. I tried pretty much everything you could think of. I mean, I was taking pain relievers, over the counter, Advil. I was trying to do different yoga stretches to try to work out whatever muscle pain might have been there. I had gone to a chiropractor. I had gone to an emergency room. I was doing whatever I could to figure out what was causing this pain, and nothing was making it any better. In fact, it felt like it was getting worse. And then I felt like it got so bad, it was so debilitating that I had to take a break from the opera tour that I was on. So I flew from Arizona back to Florida where I grew up. I went to my mom's primary care physician because I didn't have one. And his thought also was, this is probably something easily explainable, not super serious. Let's get you to a sports medicine doctor because I think it's some sort of an injury.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone was thinking along those lines of like, this is a normal pain that can be explained by something that's not super serious. And eventually, obviously, we know that it ended up being cancer, and that intense pain that was in my back was a big tumor on my spine. Knowing that piece of information changed everything. So prior to being diagnosed and just kind of trying to cope and live with the pain that I was experiencing, like, it was physically painful. I felt like I was physically suffering because there was no answer.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no cure, no relief. Like, nothing really gave me relief. And so that the pain was causing suffering, but it was also the just like not knowing that was causing the suffering. Then when I got an answer, my suffering kind of changed and it became like a separate thing. So I still had a lot of pain, but knowing that there was an explanation for it and that there was a treatment plan, whether that treatment worked or not, there was a plan, shifted my suffering. So I was able to kind of separate out the pain was one thing. And then any suffering that I felt at that point was more kind of existential. I mean, I was 24, I was healthy, all of my friends were starting their careers, starting families even, doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing at 24, right? If you look at the playbook, when you're 24, you're supposed to be, finishing school, starting a job, maybe starting a relationship. There's certain things that are on the list, on the checklist of life, and getting cancer at 24 isn't one of them. So my suffering was really, more of a, why is this happening to me sort of thing? Why me, not other people? What is going to happen? Like, big picture, I remember being so sure that I was not going to live to see 30. I just knew in my heart of hearts, I'm just not going to make it to 30. So that's where my suffering was coming from. The good news is I've made it well past 30. I'm on my way to 40. But yeah, that was the suffering suddenly was something totally different from the pain. I still had pain, but I felt like, my focus had shifted to more of an emotional pain, a spiritual pain even. And I think a large part of that was because I finally had answers and even like ways to manage my pain and that explanation of why it was even happening.
Yeah. That's a little bit like what we talked about last week with fear, how information can make such a difference. That information, although the information you got carried its own suffering with it, the information relieved a fear. Yeah. It relieved a suffering. And I think if there's one credit we can give to pain, if there's one way that we could say, all right, pain, we're glad you're around, the same way that we were trying to befriend fear in our conversation last week, is that not always, but most of the time, the great majority of the time, pain is purposeful.
Yeah.
Pain lets us know that something is not as it should be, and we need to alter what we're doing, or we need to get some help. And so the pain of appendicitis that sends you to the emergency room, thank goodness that you have that pain so that you get there and you get that dealt with. And thank goodness for the pain that told you there was cancer growing in your body so that doctors could recognize and could treat and could get you on a path to healing. So we want to acknowledge that little bit that sometimes people suffer pain that we just don't know why it's there, and it's chronic and it's lifelong. We don't want to minimize that experience at all. However, I think it's true that most of the time we can see that pain does carry a purpose. If you think of leprosy, a disease that doesn't impact the world the same way it does now as it did in ancient times when there was less understanding and there was more pain and people were treated so badly. That's a whole other kind of suffering, to be separated from the rest of the community because of your disease. But part of how leprosy works is that it attacks the nerve cells and people can't feel. And so people would reach into a fire and burn themselves. And beside the fact that your skin is attacked by this, the inability to feel, to stop when something is painful and to alter what you're doing ultimately causes damage. And so pain is our friend in that way, that it says, hey, stop what you're doing. Don't do this. Yeah, pay attention. Go get some help. Find an expert. Change what you're doing. And I mean, that's true in all of life, right? Like sometimes we aren't willing to leave situations that we shouldn't be in until pain tells us like, hey, something isn't right here. Yeah. So I want to give my little blurb, but I want to make it a mini blurb because I realized that pain in labor, pain in birth is really its own thing. It's very unique. What most people experience when they're experiencing pain, it is like, hey, something's wrong. The purpose of that pain is to tell you that something's wrong. But I use an acronym when I'm talking about pain in labor. I use PAIN. It spells pain. And we talk about how labor pain is purposeful. If you didn't have any pain, you would have your baby at Wawa. For those of you outside of Philadelphia, Wawa is our local convenience store. But I would always say, you will have your baby on the SEPTA bus, another Philadelphia distinctive. You would be these places where you didn't want to have your baby if pain didn't say, hey, something's happening, go get where you need to get with your caregiver who's going to make sure that you are in a safe place to give birth. Pain in labor, it's anticipated. We know that it's coming. I like to compare that to the idea of, I think our listeners will feel this in their body when I give this description. We've all stepped with a barefoot on a Lego, right? Legos, little green army men, I think are the only thing worse than a Lego to step on. You're walking across the room with a barefoot, you don't know it's there, and it is the worst pain of your life. But if you had a Lego in the middle of the room and you had a barefoot and you saw it and you're like, I'm going to take the Lego challenge and I'm going to take a deep breath and roll my foot slowly and carefully across it, it wouldn't be so bad. So the difference with being able to anticipate pain, it helps you to manage pain when you can anticipate that it's coming. Pain in labor, a gift is that contractions come intermittently. You get breaks in between. And so intermittent pain makes it much more manageable. And the big difference is that in pain in labor, our N stands for that it's normal. Mm-hmm. It's an indication that something exciting is happening, that your body's doing what it's supposed to do. And so not all of those apply, obviously, to a lot of pain that people have. If they have pain from an illness, a condition, an injury, emotional pain is not going to be, I'm not just going to be like, oh, well, it's purposeful, anticipated, intermittent, and normal. You'll be fine. Not that I tell people in labor they'll just be fine. But I wonder if we can examine pain that we feel, be it emotional, be it physical, be it from an injury, be it from a chronic condition. And if it has a purpose, if we can anticipate it, if it is intermittent, even if it's not normal, can we maybe find ways to work with it a little bit better by focusing on that feature and exploiting that feature for our own benefit and being able to walk through life with whatever pain that we have? So I don't know, with your experience with cancer, were there elements of it that were, obviously we've said it was purposeful, you got a diagnosis because of it, but do you see any anticipated or intermittent parts of your pain? Even normal. I wonder if some emotional pain is normal.
Yeah.
Right?
I would think so. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I know so because I've had a lot of conversations with other people who have been through similar experiences. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely purposeful and yeah, I mean, I guess it was anticipated because if there's a big tumor on your spine, of course, You're going to anticipate that that would give you pain. And I think that's why when I finally got a diagnosis, that A in pain became clear.
Yeah.
Right? Like it was like, okay, well, now there's an explanation. And now I know that I can anticipate this pain until perhaps, you know, my treatments are effective and this tumor is shrunk or goes away and I'm no longer a cancer patient. So I think, yeah, I suddenly had an explanation to explain the pain, which made it anticipated. And as far as intermittent goes, for me, I relied a lot on pain relievers. You know, I had a strong prescription for painkillers that I knew worked for me. And so I was able to control it or manage it with medicine, which made the pain intermittent. Yeah, and I do think it was normal for what I was going through.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, it wasn't normal compared to my other 24-year-old friends, but I since then have connected with other young people who have had cancer of varying different types. And we can all sit around and talk about our pain.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, we'll get to that in future episodes. There is so much to be said about having that community. But yeah, any way that you can make it feel normal, I think is helpful. So even if you're going through something that's painful in a way that's not normal, finding someone, anyone who's experienced it as well can be so powerful.
Because it's normalizing.
Yeah.
Even if it's not normal to the human experience, it's normalized for you. And that's where I think back of our episode talking with Heidi Langle about how it's so powerful for people to share openly about experiencing pregnancy loss because you don't feel alone. It's that aloneness that makes the pain almost unbearable. And I mean, sort of our mission with this podcast is that we're normalizing the talk about death. We're normalizing talk about birth into everyday life, because when we get better at dealing with pain, when we sort of recognize, you know, big beginnings and big endings are painful, but we're also experiencing little endings and little beginnings every day. And so we're getting good at life. We're getting good at dealing with pain by just having an awareness of what's happening, of the little births, of the little deaths that are happening in our everyday life, those things that we're calling thin places. And but normalizing, even if your pain is not normal. We didn't intend to talk about this when we started this podcast, but maybe this is the key, most important thing that we're saying in this episode, is that even if what you're experiencing isn't normal, you can normalize it and you can have that same sort of thriving through a painful experience when you can connect with other people who normalize it for you.
Yeah, I mean, we talk all the time about how this is a podcast for everyone, because the concepts of birth and death are universal. We've all been born and we are all going to die. And there aren't a ton of things that are truly universal like that. But I think that pain is one of those things.
Yeah.
Like, I can't really imagine someone getting all the way through life and never experiencing any pain. So this is a topic that fits exactly in with what we did set out to talk about in our podcast. And yeah, I think it's so healthy to recognize that pain is a universal experience. It might not present in exactly the same way for everyone, but we all experience pain in some way at some point.
Yeah.
And that makes it normal.
Yeah. So I want to share a little tidbit of something I think is so cool. another reason why I have the best job in the world, because part of my job is to teach people this. But so let's think about some universal experiences.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty universal. Did anybody ever have to teach you to like bite your lip when you were feeling a little nervous?
No.
Did anybody ever have to teach you like, hey, Rachel, if you're feeling nervous or if something hurts, why don't you like wring your hands a little bit?
No.
And let's say you hit your thumb with a hammer. I don't know why I always think of Fred Flintstone when I think of this, but I think of those cartoons where somebody hits their thumb with a hammer and it starts throbbing. And what do? What would you do if you hit your thumb with a hammer? You grab it and squeeze it, right? Right? So we like
you put attention on what is painful.
So this is what's happening. This is what our smart bodies are doing, is that your body carries messages from your body to your brain, and it carries pain messages on specific nerve fibers that are the pain pathway. There are separate, different nerve fibers that carry all of our other sensory messages to our brain. So heat, cold, deep pressure, light massage, taste, touch, smell, all of those sensory messages are traveling to your brain on thicker fibers than those thin fibers that are carrying pain messages. So if you are a biological neurologist, biological psychologist, I'm going to totally butcher what's called the gate control theory of pain. But I want to just give you, rather than getting off into the weeds with the details, I want to give you an image of what this looks like so that you can think about how your body deals with pain. So the gate control theory of pain is acknowledging that your body carries those sensory messages on thick fibers and those pain messages on thin fibers, and they sort of travel through your spinal column, get to your brain, and it's almost like there's a gate there because your brain doesn't let everything in. You put your clothes on, you don't feel your clothes all day long. Your body sort of tells you what to feel. Your brain tells your body what to feel, right? And so I like to imagine that like a toll booth. So if we have a 4-lane superhighway carrying sensory messages to your brain, and then we have this little country road, that's a little bit more like the capacity of what these pain fibers can bring to us. And so when you are giving your brain lots of comforting, reassuring sensory messages, and your body is also sending you pain messages, they're going to compete for the attention to your brain. And it's sort of like they can't all get through this toll booth at once. And so your brain is going to be like, oh, that smells nice. Oh, that feels good. Oh, this is warm. Oh, that cold cloth feels great. And so we can help to mitigate pain. And that's what your body is telling you to do. When you bite your lip, you have deep pressure sensors in your lip that help to release endorphins that help you to deal with pain. When you wring your hands, you have deep pressure sensors in your hands that again help to release those endorphins. When you feel pain in your thumb, but then you go to squeeze it, you feel pain, but you feel pressure and the presence of all those other nerve fibers firing that are saying like, feel all this. And so it is built into our bodies to know that when we deal with pain, we need all these other things. Sometimes our bodies do it on its own. Sometimes the way we reach out to other people when we feel pain. We have all these good responses to help us cope. Some that we know about, but you didn't know when you were biting your lip or wringing your hands that your body was just stimulating this response that was a way to deal with pain. And so I want to give our bodies a lot of credit for being able to have smart ways of dealing with pain. I want to give our human family a lot of credit for, if you think of us as sort of being a body made up of all these different parts, that we show up for each other in the way that our connectedness to other people helps us through pain. And so, it's never just an isolated thumb that hurts. That thumb belongs to a whole rest of the body that can put that pain in context. And every bit of pain that we feel, be it physical, be it emotional, can be within the context of the rest of the human family that we belong to, and how other people and how the built-in good ways of functioning can be a part of mitigating and bringing comfort in the presence of that pain.
Yeah, I love endorphins.
They're so great. That's why it's worth it to have that pain of running, because you get that endorphin rush.
Yeah. Oh, magical.
Yeah.
And I love that image of all of us making up a body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is where what I do in my professional life. You know, I'm not the doctor. I'm not the nurse. I can't prescribe medication that's going to make your pain go away. But I can be present and ask good questions and bring, just the idea of being present. I know that that is a big part of your job too, Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. But just being there for each other can be such a good pain reliever.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I think about why am I here? Why do I get this privilege of being with dying people and their families and their loved ones during this time when I'm not giving them a shot that's going to relieve their pain, or I'm not prescribing a medication that's relieving their pain? I have to remind myself that it is so much bigger than just this instance of physical pain. And I recently, in preparing for this episode, I recently read a statistic that I found to be really interesting, not actually surprising, but helpful to know that this has been studied, that when people are dying, 70% of the pain that they're experiencing is not physical pain. It's emotional and spiritual pain. And that's where human beings come in as the relief.
Yeah.
The pain relief for that 70% of emotional and spiritual pain.
Your job is so important.
My job is important.
Yeah.
But we all get to play a part. We all have that job, really. I just get paid for it. That's where I'm really lucky.
Yeah.
But we all get to be a part of that. And how amazing that we don't have to wait for the end of life to provide that pain relief. That throughout all of life's emotional and spiritual pains, we can be present with each other. We can ask good questions. We can provide just the simple knowledge of, you know, I've felt that before.
Yeah.
It's normal. You're not alone.
Yeah.
We all get to do the most important job.
We do. It's very true. Yeah. So, Rachel, I know in my job, one of the challenges is that, you know, I can't predict how things are going to happen. I'm just there as a presence and as a help. But sometimes, despite all the best planning and all the things we do, birth becomes much more difficult, requires interventions that we didn't anticipate, and it can feel frustrating to not feel like we can't just go in there and fix. And I'm guessing that you feel that as much, maybe more so in your job, that you know, you're not going to prevent someone from dying.
Yeah.
But with the pain that is associated with death being an inevitable part of the job that you do, how do you handle all of that uncertainty, all of that untidiness of people's emotions and their medical conditions being sort of something that you're there to witness but maybe not fix?
Yeah, that's exactly right, what you're explaining. It's the process of walking with someone through their end of life is messy and uncertain, and I don't have all the answers. That might come as a surprise to some of the family members that I work with, but I'm letting you in on my secret. I do not have all the answers. I don't even have most of the answers. The way that I deal with it is really to ask questions, to ask good questions, sometimes even leading questions, because most of the time the dying person or the family member who's asking the questions, they have the answers. So I just have to kind of probe a little bit more and ask good questions that lead them to find their own answers. And I just get to support that process.
It sounds a little bit like having a podcast where you have a lot of ideas that you think are important and you want to talk about them, but you don't actually have answers. And you're a little bit afraid of all the emails you might get after you publish it of people saying, but what about? I guess if we provide that same disclaimer, that's what I was trying to say at the beginning is that, oh goodness, we don't have the answers. And we're not putting our voices out into the world because of the answers, but that we have done wrestling with a lot of the questions. And we have seen people wrestle well with the questions around birth, with the questions around death. And that makes you good at life to wrestle with those sorts of questions. And so we are just co-questioners along with each other and with listeners. And so, so we're just on an exploration together. So we explored the idea of fear last week. We didn't give all the answers for fear. We explored some ideas around pain this week. And I think we've been good. We've dredged up a lot, but we have given some hope. We've shed some hope. We've given some ideas. We've given some suggestions. However, next week, we're going to wrap up with sort of trying to tap into the wisdom of generations, the wisdom of collective humanity, and the idea of ritual and how ritual isn't an answer, but we're going to explore that idea of how maybe some of the fears, maybe some of the pain that our listeners are experiencing can find some solace in the idea of individual and collective rituals. So next week will be sort of, I'm going to call it the icing on the cake as we wrap up this mini-series by talking about the role of ritual in birth and in death and in life.
Thanks for joining us. Now it's our turn to hear from you. So would you do us a big favor and go into your podcast app and rate us? Even better, would you write us a glowing review? That will help other listeners to find us. And make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode.
You can also visit our website at everydaythinplaces.com, where you will find all sorts of fun and interesting information, as well as learn about how you can help to support this podcast and earn special exclusive perks. There you will also find links to follow us on social media, or else just pop directly over to Instagram or Facebook, where you will find us at Everyday Thin Places. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Rachel. Bye.